Welcome to the Historic and we will be talking about World War I. World War I, or the First World War, 28 July 1914, 11 November 1918, also known as the Great War, was a global conflict between two coalitions, the Allies or Entente, and the Central Powers. Fighting took place mainly in Europe and the Middle East, as well as in parts of Africa and the Asia Pacific. World War I was one of the deadliest conflicts in history, resulting in an estimated 9 million military dead and 23 million wounded, plus up to before World War II. The events of 1914-1918 were generally known as the Great War or simply the World War. It was also described as the war to end all wars due to their perception of its unparalleled scale, devastation, and loss of life dissolution of the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires redrew national boundaries and resulted in the creation of new independent states. German economic and industrial strength continued to expand rapidly post-1871, backed by Wilhelm II. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz sought to use this growth to build an imperial German navy that could compete with the British Royal Navy. Bismarck thought that the British would not interfere in Europe, as long as its maritime supremacy remained secure. His dismissal in 1890 led to a change in policy and an Anglo-German naval arms race began. The 1908-1909 Bosnian crisis began when Austria annexed the former Ottoman territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Tensions increased after the 1911-1912 Italo-Turkish War demonstrated Ottoman weakness and led to the formation of the Balkan League. The League quickly overran most of the Ottomans' territory in the Balkans during the 1912-1913 First Balkan War. The Great Powers sought to reassert control through the 1913 Treaty of London, which had Austro-Hungarian authorities encourage subsequent anti-Serb riots in Sarajevo. The assassination initiated the July Crisis, a month of diplomatic maneuvering between Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russia, France and Britain, believing that Serbian intelligence helped organize Franz Ferdinand's murder. Austrian officials saw war as the best way of achieving this. Germany's Schlieffen Plan envisaged using 80% of the army to defeat France, then switching to Russia on 31 July. Britain sent notes to Germany and France, asking them to respect Belgian neutrality on 2 August. Germany occupied Luxembourg and exchanged fire with French units on 3 August. They declared war on France and demanded free passage across Belgium on 4 August. The Germans invaded, and Albert I of Belgium called for assistance under the Treaty of London. The German Plan de Decept was designed to encircling Paris and trapping the French army against the Swiss border. The plan's creator, Alfred von Schlieffen, estimated that this would take 6 weeks, after which the German army would transfer to the east and defeat the Russians. The initial German advance in the west was very successful, however. Communications problems and questionable command decisions cost Germany the chance of a decisive outcome. Japan declared war on Germany before seizing territories in the Pacific. Some of the first clashes of the war involved British, French and German colonial forces in Africa in 1914. The British Indian Army was larger than the British Army itself, an estimated 3 million Indian soldiers and laborers served in Europe, Africa and the Middle East. After the First Battle of the Marne in September 1914, Allied and German forces unsuccessfully tried to outflank each other by the end of 1914. The opposing forces confronted each other along an uninterrupted line of entrenched positions from the Channel to the Swiss border. Both sides tried to break the stalemate using scientific and technological advances. The diseases that emerged in the trenches were a major killer on both sides. The Battle of Jutland in May-June 1916 was the only full-scale clash of battleships during the war, and one of the largest in history. German U-boats attempted to cut the supply lines between North America and Britain. The nature of submarine warfare meant that attacks often came without warning, giving the crews of the merchant ships little hope of survival. Bulgaria declared war on Serbia on 14 October 1915. Serbia was conquered in a little more than a month as the Central Powers, now including Bulgaria, sent in 600. 0 troops entered the Serbian army, fighting on 2 fronts and facing certain defeat, retreated into northern Albania. The surviving Serbian soldiers were evacuated to Greece, and Enver Pasha, supreme commander of the Ottoman armed forces, dreamed of reconquering Central Asia and areas that had been previously lost to Russia. He launched an offensive against the Russians in the Caucasus in December 1914 with 100,000 troops, insisting on a frontal attack against mountainous Russian positions in winter. He lost 86% of his force at the Battle of Sarikamish. General Yudenik, the Russian commander from 1915 to 1916, drove the Turks out of it in 1902. Rome secretly agreed with France to remain neutral as the latter was attacked by Germany, effectively nullifying its role in the Triple Alliance. This arose from nationalist designs on Austro-Hungarian territory in Trentino, the Austrian littoral, Rijeka and Dalmatia. To secure Italian neutrality, the Central Powers offered them Tunisia. The Allies agreed to their demands for Austrian territory and sovereignty over the Dodec. Russian plans at the start of the war were to simultaneously advance into Austrian Galicia and East Prussia as soon as possible, while in return for an immediate entry into the war, although their attack on Galicia was largely successful. The speed of mobilization, and they did so without much of their heavy equipment and support functions. These weaknesses contributed to Russian defeats at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes in August and September 1914. By spring 1915, they had also retreated from Galicia, and in May 1915, Gorlice to Romania surrendered to the Central Powers on 6 December 1916. A combined German-Bulgarian-Turkish offensive captured Dobruja and Giurgiu. Romania re-entered the war on 10 November 1918 on the side of the Allies. The Treaty of Bucharest was formally annulled by the armistice of 11 November 1918. The Russian Revolution of November 1917 forced Nicholas to abdicate and establish the Russian Provisional Government, which confirmed Russia's willingness to continue the war. The Petrograd Soviet refused to disband, creating competing power centers and causing confusion and chaos, with frontline soldiers becoming increasingly demoralized. Vladimir Lenin was ushered from Switzerland into Russia on 16 April 1917. In December 1960, Robert Nivelle replaced Pétain as commander of French armies on the Western Front in March and April 1917. German and Ottoman forces stopped the advance of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force in December 1917. The Central Powers signed an armistice with Russia, freeing large numbers of German troops for use in the West. Germany launched Operation Georgette against the northern English Channel ports. The initial offensive was a success. After heavy fighting, however, the offensive was halted. Lacking tanks or motorized artillery, the Germans were unable to consolidate their gains by September. The Allies had advanced to the Hindenburg Line and the northern center on 24 October. The Italians began a push that rapidly recovered territory lost after the Battle of Caporetto. The offensive also triggered the disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire during the last week of October. Declarations of independence were made in Budapest, Prague and Zagreb. Austria-Hungary sent a flag of truce and accepted the armistice of Villa Giusti, arranged with the Allied authorities in Paris. Most commemorations of the war's end concentrate on the armistice of 11 November 1918. The Paris Peace Conference imposed a series of peace treaties on the Central Powers, officially ending the war. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles dealt with Germany and, building on Wilson's 14th point, established the League of Nations. The Battle of Gallipoli became known as those nations' baptism of fire Anzac Day. Commemorating the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps Anzac celebrates this defining moment. Of the 60 million European military personnel who were mobilized from 1914 to 1918, an estimated 8 million were killed. The ethnic cleansing of the Ottoman Empire's Armenian population including mass deportations and executions. Is considered genocide. The Ottomans carried out organized and systematic massacres of the Armenian population at the beginning of the war. The government of Turkey continues to deny the genocide to the present day, arguing that those who died were victims of inter-ethnic fighting, famine or disease during World War I. Allied personnel was around 42,928,000, while Central personnel was near 25,248,000. Prisoners from the Allied armies totaled about 14 million, not including Russia, which lost 5 million soldiers as prisoners from the Central Powers, about 3. Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles stated Germany accepted responsibility for all the loss and damage to which the Allied and associated governments and their nationals have been subjected. It was worded as such to lay a legal basis for reparations. 3 million soldiers became prisoners, most of them surrendered to Russians. And a similar clause was inserted in the treaties with Austria and Hungary in 1921. The total reparation sum was placed at 132 billion gold marks. In 1932, the payment of reparations was suspended by the international community of the Middle East. Arab nationalism soared in Ottoman territories in response to the rise of Turkish nationalism during the war. In East Africa, Yasovet of Ethiopia was supporting the Dervish state, who were at war with the British in the Somaliland campaign. The Ethiopian Empire was on the verge of entering World War I on the side of the Central Powers. Many countries jailed those who spoke out against the conflict, Eugene Debs in the US and Bertrand Russell in Britain. In the US, the Espionage Act of 1917 and Sedition Act of 1918 made it a federal crime to oppose military recruitment. By the end of 1917, the major armies had modernized and were making use of telephone, wireless communication. Armored cars, tanks and aircraft in 1914. Cannons were positioned in the front line and fired directly at their targets by 1917. Indirect fire with guns as well as mortars and even machine guns was commonplace. Fixed-wing aircraft were initially used for reconnaissance and ground attack to shoot down enemy planes. First efforts to comprehend the meaning and consequences of modern warfare began during the initial phases of the war and are still underway more than a century later. Anti-aircraft guns and fighter aircraft were developed, teaching World War I has presented special challenges. It lacks the meta-narrative of good versus evil that characterizes retellings of the Second World War. Thanks for watching the video. See you next time.